Joining me now is Dr. Terrence Roberts, a civil rights leader and member of the Little Rock Nine. Also joining us is Dr. Ivory Toldson, the Director of Education, Innovation, and Research for the NAACP. He's the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Negro Education and the author of the book No BS, BS standing for bad stats. Black people need people who believe in black people enough not to believe every bad thing they hear about black people. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Dr. Roberts, it is a privilege to meet you because we don't often meet people who are living embodiments of history, who are live testimony to what actually happened in the civil rights movement in this country. But that's who you are. So to me, banning AP African American history is intellectually a bad idea. It's societally a bad idea. But it's your actual lived experience. How does this feel to you?
Well, it's not so much a matter of feeling, but what I think about it is that this is not different from choices that have been made through the centuries in this country. In 1957, the ban was basically against living people. We were banned from the school, even though the law had changed. Today, the ban is against telling the story of those same people. It's all part of the same plan. And there are enough people in this country who follow that plan to make it very difficult for those of us who really want to live by other ideals. We pursue different ways of being. But the number of people who buy into this method of living their lives here is growing, I think, not diminishing. And I say that because often I'm asked by people who know my story, but haven't we made progress? And I have figured out that question is not seeking information. That's the question people ask when they want to get my sanction for them to be quiet and silent and not to confront those people who are doing things differently than the way we would do it. And so I've come up with some ideas about why that is over the centuries. And I think it's the same as it was in the beginning of this country's history, that we are propelled by greed and selfishness, and lust for sex and power, an unshakable belief in the value of white supremacy, and then finally a willingness to use violence against anybody who speaks out against using those same principles. It's an amazing set of facts. I don't know what to do with it at this point. You know, in my 81 years on the planet, I've puzzled over this, and I still don't have all the answers.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, the issue, right? What do we do about it at this point? Dr. Toldson, when I look at what the governor of Arkansas is doing today, and I think back to 1957, when, by the way, it was a racist governor, a racist white governor of Arkansas, happened to be a Democrat at that time because the Democrats liked this segregation thing. And we still talk about this governor many, many years later, many decades later. I worry that the current governor of Arkansas or any of these southern states should be thinking about this, that they're going to embed themselves in a legacy of America that at some point we're going to break the back of not being allowed to learn and not being allowed to teach. They will learn that they still stand on the wrong side of history.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And I want to thank you for the introduction that you gave. I learned a little bit about the Little Rock Nine from your introduction. It was very comprehensive and sharp. But when we look at what Governor Sanders is doing, let's just think about the absurdity of a governor who has about 85% of her teachers in her state are white, and she believes that they are indoctrinating students with a theory that she doesn't even really understand, critical race theory. So we know that that's not happening. We know that Arkansas is a reliably red state with ideologies that lean to the right. So she's making up this boogeyman, trying to make parents fear their teachers, and it's very counterproductive. And just like you said, she is on the wrong side of history. I believe that the Board of Education of Little Rock, who 2 days ago, they passed a resolution saying that they will uphold AP African American Studies and provide opportunities for those students. There's so much they can do with the resistance of the state. But we see people there. We see the school that she bragged about belonging to, defying the governor, saying that they will still offer the course. We see the NAACP chapters, the state conference of Arkansas, who's fighting against this. So I believe that we will prevail in making sure that students have these opportunities. But it's a struggle that's going to be a serious fight.
Dr. Roberts, I was in Arkansas and I stood on the stairs of that school to just try and take in a bit of history, to just try and understand what it must have been like for you. Why is it important? It's so far in history now that we cannot imagine segregated schools. Why is it crucial for us today to learn these things? There is no way to look at the images of those 19 and 20 days there and not think this was a failure in American morality and jurisdiction, ultimately a success because you were allowed into the school. There's no way to look at this but a blemish on the way we once were. Why is it important that we learn about our history and every one of these warts in order to get better?
Well, from what you just said, to me, it is most imperative that we understand history. The experience in Little Rock was not a success story, as many people believe. We were able to get into the school by combining force against force, one army against another, really. And then we were not allowed to continue because the governor closed down all public high schools in Little Rock for the following school year. The 1958-59 school year saw all of those high schools empty. Now, that created a real problem, but that was not the most pernicious example of that. There were other places where schools were closed for longer periods, and not just high schools, but also elementary, middle schools, and high schools. That was the response to the Brown decision, opposition. Many people were unwilling to obey the law. You know, we claim to be a law-abiding society, but only if those laws actually fit the thinking of those who want to do it differently. So I would think about this in terms of giving students the opportunity to learn the truth about who we have been so that they can figure out what decisions to make in the present. You see, we have made the mistake of trying to compartmentalize time into past, present, and future. Can't do that. It's one continuing stream. What happens in the past dictates what happens in the present and sort of foretells what might happen in the future.
What happens in the past dictates what happens in the present and could tell us about what's happening in the future. That's exactly right. Exactly. That's the entire reason to study history.
Exactly. If we don't study history, we miss out. We invent the wheel every other week. We have to rely on the historical record. And we know we are imperfect. You know, this is an imperfect society. So we can't diminish or dismiss what has happened. We have to look at it and learn from it and make better choices now.
So, Dr. Tolson, you know, one of the things we feature on this book is a banned book club, because we believe that if somebody tries to ban a book, then we need to feature that book, and you need to read what's in there, even if it makes you uncomfortable, even if it's not your life experience. Now, we are hearing so much from conservatives in this country about the wokeism and the indoctrination and all of that, and yet, as Dr. Roberts just said, the law is fine, the rules are fine until they start to tell a story that you don't want to tell. And that is exactly the story of AP African-American history in Arkansas and in Florida and everywhere else, right? We don't want the story that doesn't suit the narrative that we believe we'd like to tell.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we have to think about our children. We have to think about the generation that we're raising. Do we want to raise a generation that resents each other, that doesn't understand each other? Or do we want to raise a generation that respects each other and that has empathy and love for all Americans, regardless of their race? Last year, there was an 18-year-old who murdered Black people in Buffalo and had a manifesto where he talked about critical race theory being a Jewish plot. He got that from the politicians that are talking right now. And yesterday, we had a young white man who went in and murdered Black people in Jacksonville, Florida. These are the dangers of us with this of these politicians like DeSantis, like Sanders, that have this very dangerous rhetoric. So we really need to take a step back and think about what we're doing to the next generation.
Dr. Roberts, you were quoted in a story by a colleague of mine here at NBC that was published on August 18th, and it does speak about your experience that day. And again, I'm leaning into why we need to remember some of these things. You said all 9 of us suffered physically and emotionally. One of the worst moments for you was when a white student wielding a baseball bat called you the N-word and said, if you weren't so small, before dropping the baseball bat and backing off. And in your mind at that point, you thought to yourself, perhaps you were saved by your small stature.
Absolutely. It was that kind of crazy year that we went through. There was never any assurance that our names wouldn't wind up on some coroner's list by the end of the school day. And we had to walk that gauntlet every single day. And we had to develop strategies for survival. And I can remember thinking, if they don't kill me, probably my own fear might take me out. It was that kind of fearful place. But I was able to manage it by figuring out that I had the option of wrestling with my own fear. And I found out, for instance, that it wasn't other people making me afraid. I chose fear in the face of what I was seeing. And once that became clear to me, I was able to regulate the fear to a degree, not entirely, but regulate to a degree that I could survive in that environment. I think all of that is about what happens to people. You know, those kids at Central were actually operating on something that I just learned from a course in defensive driving, unconscious incompetence. They didn't know what they didn't know. And they weren't there to learn because they thought they knew it all already. And what that course goes on to say, we have to move from unconscious incompetence to finally getting to unconscious competence, where we know that we don't know, but we have to learn it so well that we can respond without having, quote, to think about it in the moment. Now, applying it to things racial, that means that people who embrace the ideology of white supremacy or the racist ideology have to understand that they don't know enough. They have to become consciously aware that they are racist. They have to take on that mantle, even though it may hurt them. But then they can move to a conscious incompetence where they are aware of their ignorance, agree to learn, and then move up to conscious competence, which is a good place to be before you get to unconscious competence, where you can act without literally having to think again about it, because you have dedicated yourself to following newer and more favorable principles for you and others.
I'm glad you learned about that in defensive driving, because now I've learned about it, and so have all my audience. So we appreciate that, sir. Dr. Terrence Roberts is a civil rights leader and a member of the Little Rock Nine. Dr. Ivory Toldson is the Director of Education and Innovation and Research at the NAACP, the author of the book.